Hey, welcome to the I'm on my way podcast, a podcast series that will help you to master your life. I'm Kalila. In this episode, I'm going to talk about self-compassion. Everyone was born in this world different and unique. Everyone has their own situations and stories. We've been taught whether we interact with a friend, colleague, peer, family member, or even stranger, we should always show respect and kindness towards them. As you heard the everyday news, it always gives you something to think about. It seems the world keeps needing everyone's help for helping other human beings. When we have compassion for others, we feel kindness toward them, empathy, and a desire to help reducing their suffering. But how about compassion for yourself? When we face hard time, most of us are self-critical. We begin with not showing respect and kindness toward ourselves like we do for others. Why do we like this? We often blame ourselves all the time. The Dalai Lama once said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Practice compassion towards yourself is as important as you do for others. Actually, the best way to learn how to be compassionate toward others is to be compassionate to yourself. When you have self-compassion, you understand that your worth is unconditional. Before we go further, let's talk about what is self-compassion. According to psychologist Kristen Neff, as the first person to measure and operationally define the term self-compassion, she describes self-compassion as treating yourself with kindness, which needed by being gentle, supportive, understanding, care and concern as like you show to your loved one, rather than judging harshly. It means when you are practicing self-compassion, you give warmth and unconditional acceptance of yourself, even when you are making mistakes. How do you feel so far? Is it easy to practice self-compassion or it is not? Well, some people find it very difficult to develop self-compassion. You have to free yourself by not blaming but accepting yourself as a dear friend. Thus, in no time, you will develop a self-compassion. Let's get into talking about 3 elements of self-compassion according to Kristen Neff. Number 1, self-kindness. Self-compassion requires being warm and understanding toward ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than ignoring our pain or beating ourselves with self-criticism. Self-compassionate people recognize that being imperfect, failing, and experiencing life difficulties is unavoidable. So they tend to be gentle with themselves when encountered with painful experiences rather than getting angry when life falls short of set ideals. People cannot always be or get exactly what they want. When this reality is denied or fought against, suffering increases in the form of stress, frustration, and self-criticism. When this reality is accepted with sympathy and kindness, greater emotional equanimity is experienced. Number 2, common humanity. Frustration at not having things exactly as we want is often followed by an irrational but pervasive sense of isolation, as if I were the only person suffering or making mistakes. But do you realize the truth is all humans suffer? The very definition of being human means that one is mortal, vulnerable, and imperfect. Therefore, self-compassion involves noticing that suffering and personal inadequacy is part of the shared human experience, something that we all go through, rather than being something that happens to me alone. Number 3, mindfulness. Self-compassion also requires taking a balanced approach to our negative emotions so that feelings are neither suppressed nor exaggerated. The process of relating personal experiences to others who are also suffering will putting our own situation into a larger perspective. The willingness to observe our negative thoughts and emotions with openness and clarity will hold them in mindful awareness. Mindfulness is a non-judgmental, receptive mind state in which one observes thoughts and feelings as they are, without trying to suppress or deny them. We cannot ignore our pain and feel compassionate for it at the same time. At the same time, mindfulness requires that we not be over-identified with thoughts and feelings so that we are caught up and swept away by the negative reactivity. Does it all make sense to you? That's all 3 elements of self-compassion. Number 1 is self-kindness, number 2, common humanity, number 3, mindfulness. Next, let's talk about 5 myths of self-compassion. Number 1, self-compassion is a form of self-pity. Well, self-compassion doesn't mean feeling sorry for yourself. Self-compassion is an antidote to self-pity and the tendency to whine about our bad luck. Research shows that self-compassionate persons are less likely to get swallowed up by self-pitying thoughts about how bad things are. A study by Philip Rees at the University of Leuven examined the association of self-compassion with ruminative thinking and mental health among undergraduates at his university. Rees found that participants with higher levels of self-compassion tended to brood less about their misfortune. Moreover, he found that their reduced tendency to ruminate helped explain why self-compassionate participants reported fewer symptoms of anxiety and depression. Number 2, self-compassionate means weakness. Researchers are discovering that self-compassion is one of the most powerful sources of coping and resilience available to us. When we go through major life crises, self-compassion appears to make all the difference in our ability to survive and even thrive. A study by David Sabara and his colleagues at the University of Arizona examined whether self-compassion helps determine how well people adjust to a divorce. The researchers found that participants who displayed more self-compassion when talking about their breakup evidenced better psychological adjustment to divorce at the time, and that this effect persisted 9 months later. Number 3, self-compassion will make me complacent. Perhaps the biggest block to self-compassion is the belief that it will undermine our motivation to push ourselves to do better. The idea is that if we don't criticize ourselves for failing to live up to our standards, we will automatically succumb to slothful defeatism. But there's now a good deal of research clearly showing that self-compassion is a far more effective force for personal motivation than self-punishment. For instance, a series of research experiments by Juliana Brands and Serena Chen of the University of California at Berkeley examined whether helping undergraduate students to be more self-compassionate would motivate them to engage in positive change. The researchers found that participants who were helped to be self-compassionate about their recent transgression reported being more motivated to apologize for the harm done and more committed to not repeating the behavior again and those in the control conditions. Self-compassion, far from being a way to evade personal accountability, actually strengthens it. Number 4, self-compassion is selfish. Many people, women especially, are taught to put others ahead of themselves. Self-compassion can seem like the opposite of what you should be doing, taking care of others. But how will beating yourself up help you be kinder to others? The source of our compassion will only be more authentic when we are able to show compassion to ourselves first. Kristin Neff and Tasha Breakfast at the University of Texas at Austin that explored whether self-compassionate people were more giving relationship partners. They found that self-compassionate individuals were described by their partners as being more caring, accepting, and autonomy supporting than their self-critical counterparts, who were described as being more detached, aggressive, and controlling. Participants also reported being more satisfied and securely attached in their relationship with self-compassionate partners. Number 5, self-compassion is narcissistic. Self-compassion is different from self-esteem, although they are both strongly linked to psychological well-being. Self-esteem is a positive evaluation of self-worth, while self-compassion is not a judgment or an evaluation at all. Instead, self-compassion is a way of relating to the ever-changing landscape of who we are with kindness and acceptance, especially when we fail or feel inadequate. In other words, self-esteem requires feeling better than others, whereas self-compassion requires acknowledging that we share the human condition of imperfection. Self-esteem is also inherently fragile, bouncing up and down according to our latest success or failure. So, forget all those 5 myths about self-compassion and start practicing it. Now let's do some exercise about self-compassion. This exercise is named Self-Compassion Break and developed by Kristin Neff to be used at any time of day or night, and designed to help people to remember the 3 aspects of self-compassion in the moment when they need it the most. Let's begin. Are you ready? Now, close your eyes. I want you to think about a hard situation in life which maybe makes you feel stressed. Maybe some situation when you are having a financial problem or a relationship problem or you are worried about something bad might happen. We need to feel a little suffering. I want you to think about something difficult, but not overwhelming difficult. So, find a situation and get in touch with it. Deeply feel it. Bring it as real as you can into your mind. And I'm going to say a series of phrases that are designed to remember three components of self-compassion when you need them the most. The first phrase is, "This is a moment of suffering." We bring the mindful awareness to the fact that suffering is present. I'm inviting you to find some languages that speak to you, such as, "This is really hurts right now. This is difficult. I'm really struggling." We are actually turning our difficulties to acknowledge it and name it. This is a moment of suffering. Next, the second phrase is, "Suffering is a part of life." Okay, we are trying to remind ourselves about our common humanity. Suffering is a part of life. Find some languages that speak to you. May something like, "It's not abnormal to feel this way. Many people are going through similar situation, and the taste of suffering may be different, but suffering is a part of life, part of being human." With eyes still closed, say this to yourself: "May I be kind to myself in this moment." The third phrase is, "May I be kind to myself in this moment." And support bringing kindness to yourself, I invite you to put your hands over your heart, feeling the warmth of your hands, the gentle touch of your hands, letting those feelings of cares stream to your fingers. May I be kind to myself in this moment. Use any kind of language that supports those sense of kindness. Perhaps the language that you would use for the good friend who you care about is going through similar situation. Something like, "I'm here for you. It's gonna be okay. I care about you." Anything feel natural to express your deep wish that you will be well, happy, and free from suffering. And then letting go of the practice and noticing how your body feels right now. Allowing any sensations to be just as they are. Allowing yourself just as you are in this moment. Now, open your eyes. That's it for this episode. I hope you found this episode helpful and become compassionate to yourself. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you can email me to info@imonmyway.id. Follow our social media. Don't forget to listen to our other episodes, and you can request what topics that you want to listen for the next episode. Bye bye.